I will give you my big five stories. It's hard, of course, there's so many topics, so many things happening, so many papers, so many events. But I would say number one is what I would call the big shrug. That's my term for the fact that even though global average surface temperatures came down a bit this year from their highs over 1.5 in 2024, they're still elevated significantly over what they were a couple of years ago. Now, this should have everybody in the whole bloody planet, or even on other planets, screaming and yelling and saying, it's time to do something. Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Climate Emergency Forum. I'm Herb Simmens, the author of A Climate Vocabulary of the Future. I'll be your host today. We have with us our regular panelist, Paul Beckwith from Ottawa, a climate system scientist with a very popular YouTube channel. Our other regular panelist, Dr. Peter Carter, is busy in New Orleans. He is at the AGU conference, the American Geophysical Union, which is the preeminent gathering of climate and other related scientists from all over the world. And we eagerly look forward to Peter reporting back on his experiences there in an upcoming program. Today, we're going to try something new. We're going to look back on this past year. What were some of the programs that we hosted? What were some of the big stories? So it's going to be an informal conversation between Paul and myself. We're probably one of the few channels on climate or anywhere else that does a full program every week. As soon as we finish one, we're preparing for the next one. And of course, there's no shortage of topics on the climate crisis. So today will be an opportunity to take a deep breath, look back, see what stands out for us. And we really want to encourage you, the viewer, to post in the comments what you think are some of the big stories, the stories that surprised you, pleased you, or gave you heartburn this past year, so we can hear what's important to you, and that will help us as we prepare our program schedule for this coming year. We've had quite a year at the Climate Emergency Forum. We've started a new series called Giants of Climate, where we featured Peter Wadhams and Sir David King, and we hope to continue that next year. We had, as we always do every year, a number of programs from the COP meetings. In this case, it was from Belém, Brazil, with all sorts of people representing all sorts of views. We hope you will take a look at those. I had the opportunity to record several programs at the Tipping Points Conference, one of the most important conferences imaginable in Exeter, the UK this summer. And we've covered topics like fungi, microbes, king tides, geoengineering, coral reefs, climate inflation, India and Pakistan, Antarctica, cities and climate economics. We had planetary boundaries with preeminent climate scientist Johan Rockström. We focused on the issue of plastics and microplastics, and we'll be talking more about that in 2026. We also focused on food, methane, and many more things, all of which are critical aspects of the sort of climate puzzle that we aim to, if not decipher, at least discuss week after week. At the end of our discussion today, I'll do a brief sort of headlines, a half a dozen or so of the key climate stories that have emerged in the last week or so. With that, since it is the end of the year and it is the holiday season, I want to give our founders and producers and the people who make all this happen behind the scenes, Charles and Heidi, an opportunity to give your holiday message, your CEF, Climate Emergency Forum message to our viewers. Heidi, why don't you go first and then Charles?
Hi, thank you very much. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's been following our channel, and I wish everyone happiest of the holiday seasons and a very happy new year.
Yes, and likewise also to thank our donors for their generous contributions and to all the people that comment on the channel every week.
Just want to say one more thing. A big thank you to Herb and Paul and Peter, our regular panelists and our host. And thank you to all the guests that we've had throughout the year.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks again to the two of you without whom this program would not have started or wouldn't continue as it has week after week, year after year, well over 250 programs and counting. And we hope many more that reflect what you'd like us to do and what's happening on the climate scene. So with that, what we decided to do, Paul and I, was that each one of us, without discussing with the other person, would describe briefly what we thought our top 5 climate stories of the year and see if there's any overlap. And then Paul and I can discuss our views and take it from there. We're going to do this very informally today. Let me just start. I will give you my big 5 stories. It's hard, of course, there's so many topics, so many things happening, so many papers, so many events. But I would say number 1 is what I would call the big shrug. That's my term for the fact that even though global average surface temperatures came down a bit this year from their highs over 1.5 in 2024, they're still elevated significantly over what they were a couple of years ago, just below 1.5, depending upon the month and the day and so forth. Now, this should have everybody in the whole bloody planet, or even on other planets, screaming and yelling and saying, it's time to do something. But in fact, all we have is a great big shrug, as we saw at the COP conference and elsewhere. That's sort of number 1, this disconnect between the reality that we've tried to chronicle, and of course, many others have chronicled over this past year or two, and the lack of ambition or concern on the part of the leaders of the world, and in many cases, a growing number of countries. Number 2 is consistent with that, sadly, is what's happening in my country, the United States, with this administration that took office a little less than a year ago and has had a scorched earth policy to literally destroy every aspect they can get their hands on that having to do with climate, whether it's programs and agencies, whether it's staff they fire, whether it's institutions they shut down, or even to the point where they're threatening other nations who want to act on climate change. Administration will use their powers to punish them if they do. I think this will be looked back on, if we survive another few decades, as a kind of dark ages. Number 3 is there are a number of papers and reports saying, and this is not just for this year, but basically so much of the land, the soils, our plants are turning from carbon sinks, from pulling in carbon out of the atmosphere, as they have done for millennia, to carbon sources, where they're putting more out than they're taking in for a variety of reasons. But that essentially says that each year that goes on, humanity has less control over the climate crisis, because it's the microbes and the plants and the ecosystems that are beginning to call the shots, and not in a way that's favorable to survival. 4th, and this is not really a big story, except for the fact that it affects millions of people. But once more, no surprise, lots of just horrendous climate disasters all over the world. In Southeast Asia, $20 billion worth of damage from the monsoons a couple months ago, over 1,300 people dying. Pakistan seems to get hit regularly with extreme storms and destruction. Here in the United States, Los Angeles in January had the fire, the Eaton and the Palisades fire, $60 billion worth of damage in one of the wealthiest areas of the world, which shows that even though climate disproportionately affects those least advantaged, it affects all of us, and no one is immune from that. The unprecedented hurricane in Jamaica and so forth. We never know where these are going to pop up, but we do know year after year they do pop up, and they tend to get worse and more extreme by the year. And 5th is expanding the lens from climate, as we all need to do, to the planet as a whole, the planetary boundaries concept. And we had the originator of that, Johan Rockström, on our program this summer. They announced the 7th of the 9 planetary boundaries has now fallen. We've exceeded this boundary, climate change just being one of them. The last one to go, according to the folks who keep track of this, was ocean acidification. So, Paul, those are my 5 big stories. Obviously, there's lots of other things that I could talk about, and I'm sure you will. I am eager, and I'm sure our viewers are eager to hear what your 5 big stories are.
Thanks, Heidi and Charles. Thank you, Herb. 2025, it's hard to believe it's almost over. I'm going to talk about my top 5 rather than just stories. First of all, I'll talk about the 5 most viewed videos on our channel, and then I'll talk about people because our guests really make up our channel, and the guests that we have really distinguishes Climate Emergency Forum from my own YouTube channel where I mostly analyze peer-reviewed research papers and I don't have guests. In terms of the most popular CEF videos, we had the polar vortex collapse 7 months ago, 91,000 views. Red Alert, Planet in Peril, about a year ago, 61,000 views. Polar Peril and the Methane Time Bomb, we did a video on that with Peter Wadhams, and that was about 60,000 views. And of course, James Hansen is a favorite on our channel, and 56,000 views. And then we had a few videos on heat waves around the world, heat waves in Southeast Asia, etc., anywhere from 30 to 50,000 views. So we're getting some good traction. Maybe we can find the secret formula for why some videos get that type of coverage as opposed to other ones. But I really want to talk about people that we've had on our channel. So my top 5 personal favorites, and it's a bit biased to recency. I really like the documentaries that we're producing. We had Peter Wadhams talking about his life in nuclear submarines under the sea ice and his research on the Arctic. He survives a very dangerous accident when there was a fire on his submarine underneath the ice, and they managed to surface. Sir David King, another excellent documentary with a bit of a political aspect because of his roles in advising government, specifically in the UK. I mentioned James Hansen. Hopefully in the new year we'll have him on when he's completed his book that he's working on. But things like, the title of some of the videos we've done with James Hansen, Warning, Climate Change is Worse Than We Thought, Global Warming in the Pipeline, Earth Energy Imbalance in the Earth System. I really personally love the work that Jennifer Francis is doing on jet streams and atmospheric flows. We had her on weather whiplashing and jet stream about a year ago. Hopefully we can get her on again soon. I really like the Cambridge Climate Repair Group and our interactions with them at previous COPs. So we interviewed Hugh Hunt and then separately Sean Fitzgerald. I love Hugh Hunt's napkin diagram, and we've done a number of videos on him this COP, same thing last COP, and I believe the previous one as well. So it's really the people that make the channel. And I'll just mention some other people that we've had on. We've had a video, Marine Cloud Brightening, tribute to Stephen Salter, shortly after he passed. Become an influencer. How do we influence people? Meta Spencer. Chaos in the Climate Casino, Elliot Jacobson. In Conversation with Bill McGibbon. The Flourishing Path, What Do We Do, with John Liu. He's always a great person. And Food and Ecosystem Restoration, we had Stephen Sherwood. Rabbi Jonathan Narrow, when he was at the Davos World Economic Forum. Some of these go back even further than a year. 40 Years of Climate with Andrew Revkin. We've at the COP15 a couple of years ago, which Heidi Charles and myself attended since it was in our neck of the woods in Montreal. I had interviews on CEF with Catherine Hayhoe and Elizabeth May. I love some of the stuff for reaching youth through climate fiction with author Tom Riley, who writes short stories on climate fiction to get people engaged. Kathy Orlando, going back even further on climate education, she and her daughter Sophia Maher. There's this guy, very, very famous on a new climate vocabulary. I think his name is Herb Simmens. We've had him talking about his book, and other people not so mainstream like Guy Lane for Vita Sapien, an Australian. We had Climate Restoration with Peter Fiakowski. He's doing a lot of stuff on that. It's a wide diversity of people that we have. If you have to pin me down to the top 5 solutions, we do a lot of stuff on plankton power, beyond carbon, forest, Jem Bendel, deep adaptation stuff. Also on global tipping points, I think it'd be nice to have Timothy Lenton and a few other people in that area on as we move forward. And the AMOC is a huge deal. The AMOC is a really big deal. You know, it's slowing. We've experienced a polar vortex collapse. That's always a fun video to do. Planetary boundaries has been mentioned and wildfires and so on. You know, also there's strange things happening in Antarctica, right? Antarctica sea ice dropped off a cliff. How does that relate to the big picture? I always try to look at the system aspects. On this channel, often we try to focus and narrow down on a specific topic depending on the expertise of our speaker. There's never a lack of topics to discuss, both on Climate Emergency Forum and on my own video channel.
Well, thanks for that panoramic review of many of the people who have been kind enough to meet with us and share their views as you see or hear Paul explaining them, the incredible diversity, both geographically and in terms of what they do and what their perspectives are. But I think it's fair to say they all have one thing in common. They are focused on some aspect of the climate emergency and are doing important work, which is why we have featured them and will continue to feature folks. And I just want to again mention to our viewers, please let us know as we set up our schedule for 2026. If you have people you would like to see us interview, if you have topics you would like us to address, our goal is not to speak to amuse or entertain or educate ourselves, but rather our audience of some now 20,000 plus subscribers. One of the things that happens, and this is true for any sort of news program, small or large, is you tell a story or you announce the news and then you look forward rather than back. And of course, that's what we're trying to change today, at least for 40 minutes or so. One of the things is to find out what some of the folks we have had on have done since we've had them on. I reached out to a few of our recent guests, just very brief summaries of a handful. We hope to do more of this next year when we'll sort of give updates from some of the people who have been on and some of their projects. We had on Brew Pierce in the summer. Envisionation, he's from the UK, and he has this extremely ambitious project to not just revitalize and deal with the climate crisis, but the entire world ecosystem. He mentioned to me that he is now working with the International Center for Earth Simulation in Geneva. I would suggest folks take a look at that to develop a planetary digital time model, a digital twin that would have real-time data streaming in on every aspect of the planet's ecology and beyond. Very interesting project that I hope we can learn more about. I reached out to Dr. Sumitra Das, the founding director of the Healthy Climate Initiative. Sumitra joined us earlier in the spring and is focused primarily on India, the nation with over 1.2, maybe 1.3 billion people, the largest now in the world. He was a one-man band and is rapidly growing. Since we met, he's had 4 climate leadership workshops, doing 6 more in South Asia, set up chapters of his organization at 2 Indian universities, started a very important project on mangrove restoration in India, and continues to support field tries with various techniques to slow down, if not stop, the loss of ice in the mountains, particularly in the Himalayas, a critical project. And I, together with Sumitra, we sponsored and organized and ran a program for the New York Climate Week in September, where we had 50 people from all over the world meeting with us to talk about how we can advance progress. So that's what Sumitra has done. We also had a really interesting conversation that I had the opportunity to host in Exeter, the UK, with Peter Bunyard and Rob Dillette, and they were talking about their new book, Cooling the Climate, using ecosystem restoration as the basis for it. One of the challenges is they have these huge, big ideas that we can literally cool the climate by 1 degree through various forest restoration and similar projects. Something very ambitious, very exciting, but not yet backed up much by mainstream science. They have just published a paper in a peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Atmospheric Science Research, to talk about what they call, and others call, the biotic pump, and how, in fact, what the physics and the chemistry and the biology is of the kinds of things they're talking about. So congratulations to Peter and Rob. So those are three of our guests that we had, in addition to those that Paul mentioned. Let me turn it back to you, Paul. Do you have any reaction to the five big initiatives that I thought were critically important for this past year?
Yeah, I would agree that they're all vitally important, especially how do we get past this impasse of too much talk and not enough action, right? I mean, what's holding us back? We have a crisis that's threatening humanity here, and yet people are going about their everyday stuff. And I mean, they have this gut feeling that things aren't great, but that's in a lot of different aspects. I'll ask the viewers, please like and subscribe to our channel and send it to friends. We have 267 videos or so and over 20,000 subscribers with big gains in the last year. Interviewing people, talking to different people, I think is vital for, educating people, getting different perspectives. I'll just talk about my own channel, which I've been doing for a long, long time now, a decade probably. My Beckwith YouTube channel. I think the YouTube count has me at 1,600 odd videos. I'm approaching about 47,000 subscribers. I just want to talk about some of the topics that people have really embraced. 9 years ago, I had a video called Unprecedented Jet Stream Crosses the Equator. It's got 471,000 views. That's my record. And then I stood in a lab coat in front of a chalkboard and was writing climate stuff. And the title was Understanding Atmospheric Circulation Patterns. That was all about Jennifer Francis and her work, jet streams, polar vortexes. That's had 92,000 views. That was 2 years ago. So then there's all of these important topics, often come through, but the question is, how do we get more traction? I'm on all of the social media platforms. I was using Twitter a lot, then it became X, and now I post stuff there. I actually post on Truth Social. I have no idea if anybody watches those videos when I post the link on Truth Social. And all of the social media platforms I'm on. When I film a video, I routinely go to all of these different channels and post. And I find Reddit is very interesting. There's some subreddits called Collapse and some other things, and I get a lot of traction. I'm experimenting with all of these different ways. I think part of educating people is through stories, and those stories could be fictions. I'm doing some work with Tom Riley. He's doing short stories on, maybe 5 years in the future to try to get young people to pay more attention. I'm writing scripts. I've been involved in two scripts and I'm working on two more. They're dystopian fictions, maybe 10, 15 years in the future, but very accurate science, as accurate as possible. I attend weekly videos, some local groups like Canadian Club of Rome every week. The Ottawa branch does talks, and I gave a talk 2 weeks ago on nanoplastics in the brain, humanity's ticking time bomb, and also Canadian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society, mostly retired STEM people from the government, meteorologists, climatologists. We do a once a month program. And of course, I want to mention Facing Future, who many of us are also collaborating with. It was once every couple of weeks. Now it's gone to more once a month sort of thing. I've signed up for a stand-up comedy course at my local comedy club. Early in the new year, I'll be talking all about climate stuff in a funny fashion as a stand-up comedian. I'll give it a go. I do have contacts with local artists in Ottawa. So landscape painter, fantasy fiction sort of painting. And I'm trying to get these people to have climate themes. Like, can you put a tornado destroying a building in your art? Or can you do a hurricane or a flood or something? And one of the guys, actually, local artist, is offering a 8-week course on landscape painting. So I've enrolled for his course as well. Maybe I'll start painting some climate landscape stuff myself. I'm trying different aspects to get the message out about climate change.
Well, I hope you'll keep us posted. I'm having a hard time even remembering all the things that you're involved in, Paul. Have you redefined the 24-hour day? I'm not sure, but my hat's off to you for that. And just a warning to all of our viewers that in a few weeks, as Paul applies what he's learned in his climate comedy workshops, I suspect our subscriber count will either dramatically decline or dramatically increase, depending upon how funny you are, Paul. So we're going to put you
Yeah.
on the spot now.
Yeah.
All right. I want to get back to climate, and then we'll wrap up today's program. The central metric, certainly not the only metric, is global average surface temperature, which has been hovering above or just below 1.5 before most people anticipated it would do so. Of course, it's influenced by lots of things, La Nina and shipping fuels and all sorts of things like that. I guess my question to you, anticipating that we'll have a similar program sometime in December 2026, what do you predict, Paul, the global average temperature will be in the fall of 2026? And what are the consequences if your prediction comes true?
Well, year to year, there is variability. We had several months when we reached over 1.7. The yearly average was over 1.5, approaching 1.6. So we're going to have fluctuations. The nature of the El Nino, La Nina seems to have changed. We're getting more permanence in the El Nino states, which add zero point 0.2 degrees or so. So I think we'll have a little bit of fluctuation. I think it's a lot easier to say what will happen in 5 or 10 years. We're rapidly approaching 2 degrees. I've seen people say we're only a decade or two from passing that. But if you follow those curves, you're going to see the fluctuation occurring. We're definitely setting new ground. The system is highly nonlinear. The reduction of aerosols has meant more solar radiation is getting through. There's fewer clouds and there's more solar radiation reaching the Earth, heating it. The albedo is a big factor. The reflectivity of the Earth is significantly dropping, especially at the poles with the melting snow and lack of sea ice in both the Arctic and Antarctica. Interestingly, the Arctic loss of sea ice kind of stalled a bit, but Antarctic, it's been since 2015, it's just dropped off a cliff, the sea ice. So temperatures are still rapidly rising. There's an interesting table. It looks at projections as to when we'll pass 1.7, 2 degrees, 2.5, 3 degrees, based on the best scientific data available. Fluctuation, variability makes it a bit of a guessing game year to year, but it's a lot easier to say what's going to happen in 5, 10, or 15 years. You can't just take the best climate models at face value. They miss a lot of feedbacks and things. So you can take their stuff as a baseline. If they say we're going to cross 2 degrees Celsius in 2050, I would look at what they're doing to come up with that number and say, well, it's probably going to happen in 2040 or 2035, right? And then every few years it gets revised and it gets closer and closer.
Thank you, Paul. Let me wrap up by a retrospective of some of the news literally from just the last 3 or 4 days. Number one is the use of coal this year. Unfortunately, it's set a high record. Coal continues to increase, and they attribute some of that increase to the policies of the President of the United States. Number two, there was just an announcement about the reorganization and possible closure of one of the most preeminent climate research organizations in the world, the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, which I have had the opportunity to visit. It's a real tragedy and another example of our do nothing good administration. On a positive note, it's anticipated that electric vehicles will be 26% of all global car sales, which is really remarkable. And many people would think, given this sort of S curve, that it's reached the point where it should now accelerate even more year after year. A good chunk of that is from China, but certainly not just from China. The latest research estimates that the peak period for glacier extinction will be from 2041 to 2055, in 15 to 30 years from now. They anticipate during that period there will be up to 4,000 glaciers vanishing every year. And of course, that doesn't mean that they're not already vanishing, but the acceleration will occur. And lastly, many of you, at least I did, studying in schools, learned that it was the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers were the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia and now Iraq. The headline I saw just this morning is that the Tigris River is in danger of disappearing because of drought, because of a variety of other stresses on it, some climate related, some due to population, some way back to the war in Iraq several decades ago. True tragedy in the making if that occurs. We don't try to sugarcoat the news here. I tell it as I see it and as I read it. Once again, we want to encourage you to like this program, to subscribe to our channel, to go to climateemergencyforum.org, our website. We hope that some of you may choose to join our other generous donors so that we can continue to bring you the quality of programs that we do. Please tell us your ideas for future programs, what you think are some of the big stories. What did we miss? I think we should all be on the lookout for Paul's completion of his comedy class.
One last favor. A lot of articles, including the ones that you've mentioned in the news, talk about a drought or they talk about a polar vortex collapse or atmospheric rivers causing all this flooding. They don't mention climate change anymore in a lot of these articles. They attribute what's happening to the specific artifact which is happening because of climate change. This is a big oversight. This is a problem. If you talk about a polar vortex collapse, you don't have polar vortex collapse deniers. If you mention climate change in the article, you immediately have some deniers. And that applies to any of these extreme weather events that we're seeing. A good exercise for viewers is whenever you see an article, try to figure out the root cause behind what the media is talking about, whether it be extreme weather or polar vortex or atmospheric river. But look, I mean, look for yourself. Most of these articles do not mention the words climate change or global warming. They just mention the phenomena, like it's a new phenomena and it just appears out of nowhere. So we have to be cautious about that.
Well put, Paul. Well, thank you again, everybody. Have a happy new year to all of our viewers. We look forward to bringing you the best in climate emergency programming in 2026. Until then, thanks so much. We'll see you soon.